Okay, hello and welcome to the third of our Unison Northern online series, Green Jobs Secure Futures, in which we're exploring what needs to be done to tackle the climate crisis, what that work looks like in terms of jobs for the North, and how we go about creating or transitioning to those jobs. We've been answering these questions through a series of 5 virtual events with some really brilliant guests, and tonight is the third of those events, and the theme for this evening is waste and plastic free. So quite a different topic to our previous events. I'm Rona Craddock, I'm a regional organiser with Unison Northern, and I'll be hosting tonight's event, and I'm joined by 3 excellent speakers who I'll introduce in turn. We'll hear from each of our 3 speakers, and then there will be an opportunity for questions. So please do feed in any questions or comments in the comment section below this video. So our first speaker tonight is Chad Mail, and to speak about his work as part of Surfers Against Sewage and as the founder of Plastic Free Ouseburn. Chad, I think it'd be really interesting to hear generally about some of the work that you've been doing as part of them groups, but also if you don't mind to start off by talking through actually what does plastic have to do with climate change and net zero, because we do often hear about the need to reduce our use of plastic, and I think there's quite a lot of publicity about that in terms of the harm that it can do to wildlife and to the ocean, our countryside, all sorts of reasons. But I don't think it's always as clear what the connection is between plastic use and our carbon emissions. And I wondered if you could touch on that as well.
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. It's good to be here tonight, and thanks for inviting us on tonight as well, Rona, and everyone at Unison. So yeah, I guess plastic pollution is just the tip of the iceberg, really, when it comes to the issues facing our planet right now. But for me, it's always been an accessible and an important way of connecting individuals to the scale of the challenges that we face. So actions on plastics, on waste, on single-use culture go hand in hand with respect for the environment and a new way of thinking when it comes to our personal economics. And this isn't just about individual actions either. Much of the time, we see corporations and governments pinning this on the individual, whilst putting millions into fossil fuel subsidies, those very fossil fuels that are used to create the plastics in the first place. And I think that's a very tangible link there. And it just generally pushes this overt consumer culture. And what this is really about is taking the individual action and turning it into a collective action, thereby forcing real positive change. And this ethos can be applied across the very many climate goals that we've got. And you know, you've got to think about the public services as well and their reliance on plastics. You know, we need them in so many ways, yet they can be equally, terrible for the environment. And I guess there's no environmental justice without social justice in that sense, really. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's that we need cleaner, safer, more sustainable working conditions for our key workers on the front line, including many in our Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities too. And that's a key theme of climate action, really. And the workers who spend their lives doing their bit to make the world we live in a better one, those same people who've literally propped this country up while it's been on its knees. And if we're to progress to a greener society, we need to make sure we do it from the ground up with no one left behind. And we need that bold climate legislation from government too. And that needs to be lobbied on from every angle possible. Grassroots groups, unions like Unison, workplaces, the list goes on. And there's no use banning straws and picking other items off bit by bit. What we need really is bold, all-round legislation from government and a massive investment in green industries to propel us into the future. And, look at deposit return schemes, for example. It's one example of really, really good positive climate legislation and something that we see in a local and a national level in other countries. And we see them in Scandinavian countries. So, and then also look at circular economic policies as championed by the likes of Kate Raworth in a book, Donut Economics. We see responsible business practices in British companies like Finisterre, Outkit, and more recently Brewdog. And that's an example of how we can tie in this sort of anti-consumer-led culture with those larger climate goals, I think. Moreover, these micro, small and medium-sized enterprises are important partners in this climate change adaptation because they are well placed to develop locally relevant, effective adaptation solutions wherever they are based. They'll employ local people in local jobs, which links to one of the main themes in your talks. And they'll procure items locally and resourcefully and sustainably. I guess really it's this concept of waste for me, I think, that really ties in and really links, plastic pollution to the world at large and the problems that we face with climate. And I think David Attenborough summed it up best for me recently, if I'm all right to say something that he said. And I felt like it was quite powerful, really. But he said you can do more and more and more the longer you live. But the best motto to think about is not waste things. Don't waste electricity. Don't waste paper. Don't waste food. Live the way you want to live, but just don't waste. Look after the natural world and the animals in it and the plants in it too. This is their planet as well as ours. Don't waste them. And I think that idea of waste is really the sort of the link there. So, we've got this consumer culture on one end, we've got unsustainable business practices on one end, and then we've got our just general attitudes towards nature, biodiversity, and habitats. And I think this all really is part of one big theme, in my opinion. And I hope that sort of succinctly puts it together from my perspective, really, I hope.
Definitely, yeah. No, I think that's really useful, Chad. I totally agree, and actually, I think that kind of stuff in terms of connecting all those issues together and how it's not just, plastic in its own little bubble, but plastic waste, the whole environment and the climate change all connecting together, and in terms of the society we're trying to build. No, so that's really useful. It'd be good to hear as well about the kind of stuff you've been doing. I know, I'm sure you've made kind of like a record a bit in Newcastle in terms of the work you've done in Ouseburn. If you wouldn't mind sharing a bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no worries. So the Ouseburn campaign was about achieving official plastic-free community status for Ouseburn from Surfers Against Sewage, the charity for which I'm a regional rep. It's a marine conservation charity, and there's loads of campaigns on water quality, plastic pollution, and more recently climate change as a whole. So Ouseburn, when it got its plastic-free status earlier this year, was the first of its kind in Newcastle. So what does this mean, I guess, is the question that a lot of people ask. So it means the whole community, from residents to the businesses and community organisations to local government, with figures such as Catherine Lyons, who's on the call now, getting involved and committing to positive changes to plastic usage and general waste practices. And this is something that came up a lot when we were discussing this campaign. It's, this needs to be a conversation about waste as a whole. So it includes ditching unnecessary plastics by replacing them with alternatives or by working with other people in the area to reduce the usage. And there's 5 key objectives that we follow in Surfers Against Sewage to achieve that plastic-free status. So the first objective is local governance. So I immediately got Newcastle City Council on board, and it's something that I'm proud to say they immediately acted on and encouraged as part of the waste strategy around the waste commission that they were doing at the time of starting the campaign, which was now probably about 2.5 years ago. So number 2 was resistance hubs. So local businesses needed to lose at least 3 single-use plastic items and replace them with sustainable alternatives. So removing the option for customers is the easiest way that people can avoid them or replace them. Ouseburn Coffee, I'll mention them, they were a really inspiring partner. So they've not only removed single-use plastics from most of their items, if not all by this point, but they're aiming to adopt a circular economy approach to everything they do. And this was all part of the conversations that were going on. Number 3, plastic-free allies. So this was about getting local people on board and community groups. So they need to be following the businesses and ditching the plastic use also. Ouseburn Trust and Ouseburn Farm are great allies here as well. Number 4, plastic-free rallies. So you do fundraisers or cleans. So twice a year, we hold a river clean. With around 20 plus volunteers, we can clear a skip's worth of plastic pollution from the Ouseburn River and the surrounding area. And at the moment, every week, I'm actually not so sure at the moment, to be fair, but every week, members of the Ouseburn Trust environmental group get together and do a litter pick. So if anyone's watching, they want to get in touch with that, they should give them a shout. It's great. Number 5, so we needed the third. Well, actually, it's one of the first things I did, even though it's not necessarily the first thing you need to do. But it's to pull together a strategic steering group to get things on the go. So I did this, and the group involved local councillors, local council officers, and a business leader. So having these people on side and joining the fight really helped to get things done, to be fair. But the COVID crisis has really stopped a lot of this work in its tracks, since we were awarded the status last March. But I'm determined to get it on the go again soon, when businesses probably aren't fighting for their life so much, I guess. And I guess that brings in a wider point as well. I guess any climate action has to be equitable for small business, and I try and remind myself that when I speak to them. You've got to bring them with you, I think, when you're doing it. So yeah, it was super inspiring, and it took about 2 years because of the amount of work and the amount of transitioning that businesses need to do. But we got there in the end, and even now, I mean, that is still something that needs to continue. It's not the be all and end all. Now that was the long answer, but I hope it helps.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much.
It's all right.
I think in terms of like that, the kind of, it fits in a lot with what we've been talking about in terms of how it's like, like you say, it's a tangible, accessible, it's a practical thing that we can do that makes sense. In terms of like reducing plastic waste, finding out how we can get alternatives. And I think when you're talking about partnerships, building those networks with, with the council or whoever else, that's something that's come up a lot, in that no person and no organization can tackle this themselves, so that it's really, really important, and that's one of the reasons we're keen to kind of have these conversations and have them in a kind of public way. And I think in terms of like that link between plastic and carbon, I know in terms of how plastic's produced and how it's destroyed at the end of its use is really carbon heavy, so it's not kind of to be taken lightly, I think, in terms of the impact it has in climate change. But yeah, thank you very much, Chad, for obviously joining us today, and it's really interesting to hear the work that you do. So our next speaker is Catherine Lyons, Principal Advisor for Waste Strategy at Newcastle Council. So Catherine, again, thanks for joining us today. I have to say, waste isn't an area that I'm particularly familiar with, so interested to kind of hear more about the work that you do. It'd be really good if you could share a bit about what the strategy is for waste for the council, and how that kind of ties in with the agenda for climate change and net zero, and perhaps maybe some of the challenges, what some of the challenges are in the work that you do around that.
Thanks, Rona. Thanks for asking me, and it's really good to be alongside colleagues who were really influential in delivering some of those waste strategy actions, either the Resource Newcastle Partnership and with Chad with the Ouseburn Free. Right. Zip through. Next slide. Whoa, that's cool. So what you asked for, a little bit of the background, is Newcastle had their waste commission, and that resulted in a report, No Time to Waste. So 2017-18, they engaged 7 nationally regarded specialists who gathered evidence from all around the country and around the world, and produced a report in 2018. But it was really a call for action for the city as a whole. So its recommendations were really around communities, partners and businesses. So if you want to go and read that, that's still it's on our website. It's a really good read. It's got loads of useful information in it. So I joined the council around this time, and one of my first tasks was coming up with a response to that, and was looking at our own waste strategy. And in the meantime, there was also the National Resources and Waste Strategy was published. That was December 2018. So we linked in the Waste Commission, the National Strategy, into the Newcastle Waste Strategy, which was published and approved in early 2019. And it's just had its first year report. There's a little summary on the next slide, so I won't go through that yet. But it's interesting, linking back to what Chad was saying about how to deliver some of the actions. There's things we can do, which are in the action plan, things that are within our control. There's the things that we can try and influence across the city, but there's many things that we need national support for. So we're working with DEFRA. We've been engaged in the consultation with delivering the National Resources and Waste Strategy, and the Environment Bill is how that will be enshrined in legislation. So that was published in January this year, and that is going through committee stages at the moment, and we're expecting the second stage of consultation on the national strategy early next year. And then you asked, how does this all fit into Net Zero Newcastle? Again, that draft plan, that's just been published in September, and there's a whole section in there on waste as well. So that's got a lot of those actions that we put within the strategy. So they're all the ones that have a climate impact, which is a lot of them, will be linked through directly into that net zero plan as well. If you just go on to the next slide, that was just a brief summary about what the vision for the Newcastle waste strategy is. So that's what we want Newcastle to be: clean, green, sustainable, waste less and recycles more. Have to agree totally with Chad. It's people often focus on what do we do with the plastic, or what do we do with the waste? Actually, if you could stop making the waste in the first place, that's what we really, really want you to do. So what we've just got listed there, you can also read, those are the activities that the strategy itself is focusing on. A lot about behaviour change and engaging with communities. We're looking again about focusing on reducing the waste, looking at potentially reusing where we can, then recycling and composting. We've got a bit of an issue in the city around recycling contamination, so we had specific actions on that. And then we're looking at other changes and improvements to how we collect waste, and we've done quite a lot of reviews around areas which had shared bins, areas which were having issues with the bins and containers, so that's an ongoing process. And we're looking at some of the other things like food waste, but some of that's subject to the national consultation, so it's all complicated. We've done some changes to the household waste recycling centres, but we're working on a much bigger project to actually look at our whole our bin infrastructure, our whole estate, and have we basically got the right number of household waste recycling centres in the right place, and are they meeting the needs of the communities? And from there, we want to build in more reuse. And we want to look about enforcement, but that enforcement is, a lot of it is with a small e. We wanted to link it in with behaviour change. We want everyone to do the right thing. Investment and partnerships to deliver future residual waste treatment, I'll come on to a little bit separately. We go to the next slide. If you can. Is it going? No? Yes? Right. That's just a big long list. I'm not going to briefly, that was some of the actions that we've taken just over the last year. We've done technology. We've got smart litter bins. You might not realise it, but all our on-street litter bins have got sensors in them. So they report on how full they are. So we've actually, people have objected, we put fewer in, but they're bigger. We can empty them in a smarter way. We've got an online portal where people can report where the bins are, and we can actually collect the waste and reducing emissions. So we've actually reduced the number of vehicle movements. We've upgraded our vehicles, so they're all what are called Euro 6 now. They've all got electric bin lifts. We're looking at electric vehicles. We have a new recycling contract, which includes us to recycle more plastics now, all the pots, tubs and trays. But we also reduced 30,000 vehicle miles a year as well, because we found a closer delivery point. So that delivered even more carbon savings. So you can see the two things, a lot of reducing the waste, doing things smarter with the waste, also reduces our carbon as well. In terms of the recycling, so where we had problems, we're looking at different options, including opt-ins. So people are positively recycling, and they'll have their individual bins. We're working with anyone. Some of this work has been, as you can imagine, a bit adversely impacted on by COVID, but we were looking at areas where we can do sort of more shared collections with businesses. So we can reduce the number of bins there are, we can reduce the number of vehicle movements, again, reducing our carbon footprint in the city. And then the one that is occupying a lot of my time at the moment is we've developed a partnership with the 7 local authorities to deliver a new strategic waste contract for residual waste facilities. So basically the 7 authorities, and we've gone out to procure a new energy recovery facility. This will be based in Teesside, but it'll take the waste from Newcastle, Durham and the 5 Tees Valley authorities. But it will be a local authority controlled. It'll be a private contractor who will operate it, but we've all worked together to deliver it up to our standards, so taking account of our needs. to deliver that reduced sort of carbon footprint. Talking about waste, the value of that procurement in total for 7 authorities over the lifetime of the plant, which we estimate between 26 and 40 years, is £2.1 billion. So that's why it's exercising my time at the moment. If you can click onto the next one. This is a picture that we've tried to use, keep needing to update it, but it's visibly just to try and explain how complicated waste is, just even within the city, how we collect it and where it goes and what happens to it. And since this was done, it's kind of changed again, but it gives you a basic idea of just how complicated it is. So we try and simplify it as much as possible. So the diagram is there to try and show you, but even there's a middle row there which shows pizza boxes. We just put out some publicity because people have asked about pizza boxes. Whole pizza boxes technically are recyclable, but our processor tells us pizza boxes are usually full of pizza. So what they've said is if you can tear off the clean bit of the cardboard, we will recycle it. We'll recycle whatever we can, but it has to be possible. It has to not have a negative environmental impact as far as possible. Go on to the next slide very quickly. And this is just talking about now where we're looking at strategically. We're looking at costs versus environmental impact. It looks it's much more environmentally friendly to do the curbside recycling and reducing the landfill. So where we're looking at is the bulk of the waste is probably going in the middle towards the sort of the RDF, the EFW, but we're trying to push as much as possible towards composting and more recycling. Then last slide, this is the other bit that's exercising, is again we need the legislation. There's going to be more national consultation on the National Resources and Waste Strategy earlier in the new year, and I'm engaged with DEFRA on consultation on things like consistency in collection, specifying what materials have to be collected, but not just by households, but also small businesses will have to collect these specified materials. We'll all have to collect food waste separately, and there'll be certain collection standards. It'll all be paid for, apparently, by extended producer responsibility. There's some legislation already being enacted around plastics, around banning certain plastics, but the positives of that is the plastic packaging tax, which will be an incentive to use recycled content, because there's no point us collecting all these plastics for recycling if no one's then going to use them. And then the deposit return scheme, again, that's a really good one. If people want to talk about it, because I've had a long conversation today with someone from British Glass, and typical in all waste, it's complicated. While a deposit return scheme is a good idea in principle, there's an awful lot of unintended consequences that could really adverse, particularly on small shops, small traders, and those who are socially vulnerable as well. So whistle-stop tour of where's strategy going locally and where it's come from and where it's going to. But watch this space. If the legislation, if the Environment Bill goes through, these changes will be enshrined in law by 2023. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, that was brilliant. I think like loads of detail there that people just won't have been aware of. I certainly wasn't. And I think, about, the behavioural change, all at some point we're going to have to accept that we are going to all have to live a bit differently, aren't we, if we want to tackle, this huge crisis of another nature to the current one. But we're kind of keen at Unison that we'll look at the big picture, and we acknowledge it's, there's a lot of work to be done on a kind of strategic scale in terms of like, those, the big companies who produce the vast amount of emissions, but collectively we can influence quite a lot if we do take those steps. So I think it is really important. I mean, I didn't know that about the smart litter bins, so that's news to me. That they are able to monitor how much people put in. It's very clever. And again, I think what you picked up on around those steps where you're connecting kind of the waste process with then mileage and actually how far things are traveling. It's getting different parts of organizations to speak to each other as well as speaking to external organizations, isn't it? And kind of finding those links and creative ways of working. So yeah, no, thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. And I know there's some questions which we'll come to at the end that have come out because of that. But we will move on for now to our third and final speaker for tonight, Jason Mitchell, waste manager at Newcastle Hospitals. And Newcastle Hospitals have been a real leader in their work on raising the green agenda and changing how we talk about climate change, particularly changing the narrative and talking about climate change as a public health issue as much as anything else, and getting us to try and address it in that way. So really keen to kind of work with Newcastle Hospitals around this. And I understand Newcastle Hospitals is one of the first hospitals, if not the first in the world, to declare a climate emergency, and we're proud of the work that we've done with Newcastle Hospitals on the green agenda. So Jason, your role within the green team, if I can call it that, at Newcastle Hospitals is around waste, and it's something that we're keen to hear about in terms of the work that you're doing, how that does or doesn't connect with the work to reduce carbon emissions and tackle climate change. And if you've got any, we can pick this out at the end in the questions, any lessons you think we can take away that people could perhaps apply to their own workplaces. I think you've got some slides as well, Jason, so I'll get them up for you to talk us through.
Okay.
Oh, hang on.
Just while you're on, Rona, shall I plug the launch of our sustainability strategy tomorrow?
Please do, yeah, please do.
Yeah. I don't have the details of where you can go and find the virtual launch of our strategy, but the Twitter feed, the Newcastle Hospitals Twitter feed tomorrow will be full of it for sure. It's a very big deal for us and our team. So as Rona mentioned, I'm the waste manager for the trust. I am part of the wider sustainability team. So we are there to look at all aspects of sustainability, whether that is our ambitions for net zero by 2040, or whether that is our ambitions for achieving some quite miraculous outcomes for our waste streams, or biodiversity, or sustainability within procurement. That sits within us and within our team. I am just going to talk about waste for the time being, and we'll see how hopefully how that links in with the quest for net zero. Okay, if we could just have the next slide, please. This just gives you an indication. I don't need to go through the detail of this slide, but it gives you an indication of the volumes of waste that we generate. If you're familiar at all with a hospital, you'll be aware that there is a wide variety of different coloured bags that we use within a hospital environment. The two things that I will highlight to you from this particular slide are the fact that we landfill nothing, and we have landfilled nothing since 2011. And I'll highlight the fact that we handle small beer compared to what Catherine's dealing with, but about 5,000 tonnes of waste a year from our organisation. The next slide, please. The next few slides will be a very sort of whistle-stop tour, I think, through how we categorise our waste, and I think that will give you an idea of some of the obstacles that we have in front of us in order to achieve movements of waste up the waste hierarchy in a more carbon sort of efficient way of working. So this is how it used to be about 25 years ago. This is a poster that we found behind a filing cabinet that we moved out a few years ago. this was the clinical waste poster. You know, if it's clinical waste, it goes in a yellow bag, and if it's general waste, it goes in a black bag. That was the end of the story. That's how it was 25 years ago. But if you could show the next slide, please, Rona. That shows you a waste chart that we use today, a much more complicated and wider array of waste streams and colours, of which I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour through them now, just to give you a flavour of the kinds of things that we have to think about within a hospital environment. And it gives, again, that idea of some of the difficulties we have, I think, that are placed in front of us that we have to overcome in order to move waste up the waste hierarchy. Next slide, please. This is our Bible. We don't make this stuff up. This is the guidance that tells us what we need to do with our waste and justifies the colour scheme that we have. Next slide, please. Anybody with an infection, and this has been pertinent this year, the waste from that patient goes into an orange bag. Okay, that's all you really need to know from this slide. Orange bag waste is waste that's classified as infectious, it's technically hazardous, and it must be sterilised before it's disposed. The opportunities to recycle this waste or move it up the waste hierarchy are relatively slim. Next slide, please. This is a waste stream that we began to introduce about 3 years ago. We were slightly behind the curve compared to other hospitals and trusts. But this is waste. We realized that actually we were categorizing a lot of waste as if it was infectious, but it was coming from patients who didn't have a known or suspected infection, and that we were legitimate in sending our waste away as non-infectious. This is environmentally beneficial because this waste does not need to be sterilized before it's disposed, and it can go straight to the disposal phase. In our case, we send this to an energy recovery facility in Teesside, similar to the one that Catering was talking about earlier that she's hoping to develop with the other local authorities. Okay, could you scoot through the next slide onto the next slide, please? Thank you. Another waste stream and another waste colour, the blue waste stream. This is our pharmaceutical medicinal waste, about 140, 150 tonnes of this a year, generated in all wards. We have a pharmacy production unit at the RVI. This waste, until 2 years ago, was sent to a clinical waste incinerator, and it was incinerated in order to be destroyed. We have since done some work with this, and its European Waste Catalogue code actually allows it to go to an energy recovery facility. So instead of burning it to destroy it, we can actually incinerate it to generate electricity and energy, which is one step up on the waste hierarchy, and it means we're not burning coal or gas or oil in order to achieve heat and power. So similar to our tiger bag waste. Next slide, please. This is the purple waste stream, refers to our cytostatic waste stream. Cytotoxic waste is generated in our cancer wards, primarily at the Freeman Hospital, but not exclusively. There's some at the RVI as well. There is no opportunity for us to do anything other than incinerate this waste. And I want to have the next few slides will show you the kinds of waste that we can't do anything about, and we must incinerate them. The next slide, please. Anatomical waste. We have a lot of ladies give birth at the RVI, about 7,000 per year, and every one of those babies is followed by a placenta. Most placentas are destroyed and must go to an incinerator. There's not much opportunity for a placenta or an amputated toe or anything like that. It must be incinerated, must be destroyed. The next slide, please. This is for waste which comes from more highly infectious individuals. We don't have a great deal of this. Probably the more pertinent waste stream for this would be patients with CJD. Their waste must go as highly infectious to be incinerated. Again, the opportunities to do anything with this are limited. And the next slide, please. And then we have sharps. And at the moment, the option for sharps is incineration. but there may be opportunities here in the years to come. These are being explored, but we're not quite there yet at this stage. And then, of course, next slide, we have paper towels, we have crisp packets, we have food, we have pop bottles, we have tin cans, we have paper, we have all wide range of what we would refer to as general domestic waste. And this is about half of everything that we produce every year. So these things are still created, still generated within the hospital environment, and we work with this. You can see the systems there to segregate that waste and to get it away as mixed, dry mixed recycling and recycled. And again, moving that waste up the waste hierarchy away from the disposal element. Next slide, please, Rona. This is where we were in 2011. Just to highlight again the landfill element of this. In 2011, we landfilled 40% of our waste. And if you could also pay attention to the segment of the cheese, which is green, about 8% of our waste was recycled. That would have mainly been baled cardboard and some metal. But if we go to the next slide, we've seen this already. We landfill nothing now, nothing goes to landfill, but we do see a big significant increase in the waste that goes to an energy recovery facility. But alongside that, it's pleasing to note a very big jump in the recycling figure and the recycling element of this. A lot of work has gone into to that. Next slide, please. These are slides provided very kindly by my colleague who works quite closely with the catering department, just to highlight some of the initiatives that we have introduced recently. So within our catering area, and this catering plastics are, I guess we see it as the low-hanging fruit, and it's the area that we can perhaps achieve the most in initially. But just to give you a flavour of what we do, we offer reusable coffee cups and drinks bottles for sales. You can see the Chili's bottle there. I'm surrounded by colleagues drinking from their Chili's bottle all day long. I prefer a ceramic mug, but there you go. Still reusable. We offer incentives for reuse, which we'll come on to in a slide's time. There are no plastic straws offered within our catering outlets. Sugarcane takeaway boxes and wooden cutlery provided, all of that in an effort to reduce the plastics that are generated within the organisation. The next slide, please. One of the incentives with the coffee cups is a 25% discount on your coffee if you come back and use your reusable coffee cup. We sold a great deal of the rice husk cups to our staff, but the incentive is 25 pence off every time you refill with that coffee cup, and that's proved to be very popular. And a lot of staff walk around with that. The Shine brand is our brand within the sustainability team brand. A lot of people walk around with that branded coffee cup in their hands throughout. Next slide, please. And then a little bit about the reduction in single-use plastics within the catering department. A lot of wards received their food on plastic plates or disposable plates, paper plates, polystyrene, bowls, plastic cutlery. A lot of this stuff was used at breakfast time. We have implemented a system where now reusable bowls go up to the wards and come back, and are then washed and go back out again. And you can see the figure there. That's nearly 2 million avoided single-use plastics in a single year, which is quite a significant figure. And payback within just 2 months. So to prove it doesn't have to cost a bomb in order to do the right thing for the environment. The next slide, please, Rona. We're nearly there. It's just some of the opportunities that I've been involved in. We, since 2017, have been working with a company called Emerald Biogas, the part of the Warrens group in Newton Aycliffe. They take our packaged food waste. We generate, unfortunately, quite a lot of packaged food waste. As you can see, in 1 year, we diverted about 140 tons of packaged food away from being compacted and sent as black bag waste to the anaerobic digestion process in Aycliffe, where the food is processed through the plant, the outcomes being a gas replacement, better than natural gas. Food-derived gas, which is piped to the grid. and also a slurry. It's often described as being a mechanical cow, this AD plant, but the slurry is used as a soil improver by farmers within the local area. So we've diverted that waste entirely from disposal, and it's got a much better use at the end of its life. Okay, next slide, please. What I will also highlight is we've introduced at the Freeman Hospital, soon to be the RVI as well, a system for working with some of the plated food that comes back. A lot of food does come back on trays and plates uneaten. Patients are often unwell, or patients have often left the ward by the time the meal arrives for them. That's very, very common, and food comes back and it does get disposed. Just to the images, the second, third and fourth images were taken from the Metro Centre. The same system was in place there that we implemented at the Freeman. The food waste comes back. It goes through effectively a spin dryer, a centrifuge, which spins the food. Moisture comes off the food and you're left with a dry flake. The moisture goes to sewer, but doesn't cause blockages. There's no solid food going down through there. It's a much better system for Northumbrian Water to manage. And the dried flake goes to the same people that take the packaged food waste, and they push that through their plant again for the creation of a biogas and a digestate to spread to land. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, we were the first trust in Europe to introduce this system of managing sharps and needles within our hospital. We were the first, I promise you we were. We beat Sunderland by about 10 minutes, and we're sticking to that fact. This was 2004 time. SharpSmart are based in Spennymoor. This is a reusable sharps disposal system. There's no burn involved in this, except for the contents of the bin. The sharps themselves must be incinerated, but in a lot of places, the box that they go into as well goes to incineration. This replaces this entirely. It's a safety mechanism. It has a tilting tray. It's an amazing piece of kit. We use them extensively across the Freeman and the RVI, and they have saved a significant amount of carbon in terms of us not burning single-use disposable burn bins and sharps bins. And then the next slide, Rona. Thank you. And similarly here, we use in every single ward and department, we use cardboard-based, what are called bio bins for our pharmaceutical wastes, and that replaced plastic bins, which again went to an incinerator. It's a renewable material, again, much better for the environment, replaces a lot of carbon dioxide equivalent. So we push that one far and wide, and that pretty much concludes it.
Thank you very much. I mean, that was fascinating for me. I mean, that waste chart that you kind of shared at the beginning, I definitely prefer the first one if it can be that simple. But and I guess that's part of the challenge, isn't it, of trying to I realize realistically that's the whole point. It's a complex area, but I think all of our rules is to make this as simple as we can, because that's how we engage people with it, isn't it? Loads of positives, I think. They're first in Europe. That's really exciting. And it sort of reminds me of like election night competitiveness in terms of that 10 minutes beforehand. Yeah. And the kind of like the food angle as well, bringing in that kind of public health stuff, because I think that's the thing we seem to come back to a lot with climate change is actually if you're tackling climate change in the right way, it can address a lot of different issues. So, if our hospitals can be providing kind of that local, quality, healthy food, it's good for all sorts of reasons, isn't it? What I was just going to do, we've had a few comments and questions in. I'll just go through some of the comments and then I'll ask if you don't mind picking up some of the questions. So, comments we've had from Carol Miller says that my organisation, NHS Business Services Authority, have committed to net zero by 2020 So 2020, and want us to be a leader to reduce as far as possible. That's a positive. Jim Barnes has said, sadly, not every council recycles everything. It varies with each one, what you can and can't recycle. Tracy Wainwright, who is one of our activists, has said, it's really good to see the process for recycling, as for most people it can be confusing as to what you can recycle and what you can't. I think that's really accurate in terms of when we're talking about let's make it as simple as possible, and the more we make it a habit, the more people will stick to it. Lindy Robertson has said, she's got a few questions. I'll come back to them actually because we might want to answer some of them. They're helpful. And Carol Miller we have picked up. So questions, I think it would be great if Catherine, you could help with this one, which is particularly around composts. So Lindy Robertson said, can councils, and I don't know, you'll be able to comment on the extent to which councils are engaged with this kind of thing or not. Can councils promote things like, I don't know how you pronounce, is it bokashi? Bokashi composters to reduce food waste. She's also mentioned around free collection of garden waste, and whether you know if that's something that's kind of been discussed. And there was another comment in terms of the compost aspect, that lots of things are advertised as compostable, but apparently need to be sent to industrial composting, not house composters. So I just wondered if you'd be able to say something about those.
Right. Things like the bokashi, we haven't got a subsidy on them. We're a bit cash strapped, but we do advertise through our website on our composting page. It goes through to our Get Composting partner. So what we do is we offer a subsidy for what I would call your standard garden composter. So you can buy one, get one half price, but it's a subsidised rate. In Newcastle, each authority again has a different arrangement, but we do promote them, and on their site they do have the bokashi and the Johanna, and there are other ones which are hot boxes for composting all the waste and the food waste as well. So there are links there if you're really interested, but they are quite fiddly. You have to be a really, really dedicated person. We've worked with quite a lot of environmental and green charities, and the people who work for them have struggled. So they're quite difficult to promote widely because we know that they're quite difficult to use. They're great. So the bokashi is like an in-house wormery. So you can have it even if you haven't got a garden. You can put your food waste in and it's odorless and little worms eat everything up. Free garden waste is one of the elements that's up for consultation with the resource and waste strategy. So it was one of the possible proposals that was in the draft environment bill. It's not something that I've been in several authorities and have been involved in introducing charges, and it's not at the moment a statutory duty to collect it, or even if it was separate, we can still charge for the collection. And in all the northeast authorities where they introduced a collection, it might sound counterintuitive, but we've either collected exactly the same amount of garden waste or sometimes slightly more because we've actually ended up with better quality. It's not a huge charge. In Newcastle, it's £2 a collection. By having it paid for means that we can still collect across the whole season. Places where they don't charge or charge less, they sometimes only charge for 10 over just a summer peak. It makes this collection system more sustainable. It means we're only going and collecting from people who are filling their bins. Where you offer a free collection, if you have 102,000 households, you potentially are travelling around the whole city to visit 102,000 households, but we know that probably 25,000 use their bin regularly. So in terms of the carbon, we probably need more vehicles to do it, and we probably are not going to collect any more waste, but we don't know. It may happen, it may not. And
I think the point you touched on as well, it's really important that we have these conversations, because I think you know, the point about funding, we've got to be clear about limitations and what, you know, I guess the point of these conversations is what are the solutions? How do we tackle climate change? What do we need to be done? And then where are the obstacles and what can we do about them? And I guess you know, from a Unison perspective, we're very acutely aware of the kind of financial position of local authorities, and we've got, you know, a huge campaign at the minute in terms of trying to push for that money to be invested in local authorities so they can do all of this like essential work.
Yeah.
And at the minute, you know, we are aware it's very much core services, but it's really interesting to see what could be done if those things were available, the proper investment. Next question I was going to ask Jason, if you wouldn't mind picking this one up. It's related to the NHS, not a question that you'd directly, I think, be able to answer, but maybe to touch on anything you've been involved with it. And it was really around it was from Lindy Robertson. It was around the recycling of the kind of the PPE that we hear so much about at the minute. So your masks and your gloves. And I don't know if you could comment on that, if you've been involved in discussions around that, and how much is the recycling of that happening or not?
It isn't. I think we're still at a stage where there's a high degree of nervousness with regards to the PPE that people are wearing, and also the requirements to wear the PPE in certain areas are more stringent, because there's more likely, or there actually are COVID positive patients in that environment. A lot of the PPE will be a disposable mask. There are no opportunities that I'm aware of for the recycling of those, and further to that, I'm not sure there's any recyclers out there that would want to take that as a material, simply because of the unknown. 90% of it will come off people who have no infection, but there's the 10% or whatever of the unknown. So it's not straightforward. Aprons and things are a very thin film, plasticky film. The recyclability possibilities for that are limited. What I would say though is that in the ITU areas where they are treating COVID patients, the visors that are used by staff are not disposed. They are reused, wiped clean, reused endlessly, really, until presumably they can't be used again. So the recycling of PPE is that would be a very interesting conversation with our Director of Infection Prevention and Control, and I don't think I would come away very, very satisfied.
And very relevant concerns as well. You know, clearly it's really got to have that balance right. So no, that's really helpful. Chad, if you don't mind, we've got a kind of a comment question. I'm going to combine and see if you wouldn't mind just commenting and see what your view is. It's a comment from a member of Unison staff, Paul Riley, says, you know, I try my best to reduce waste use with their own bags, composting, etc. When it comes to recycling, still find it very confusing as to what can and can't be recycled, which I think is like what a lot of people find. And what thinks is important is that a lot of things that seem to be advertised as recyclable, but actually it involves posting them or arranging collections and things like that. And then so if you wouldn't mind just commenting on that and your thoughts around that, and what could be done to make that simpler. And another comment from somebody else, Lindy Robertson, who says Norway has a refund policy on all plastic drinks bottles and bags. It can be almost 10% of the original cost, and if you think that's a positive thing, if that's something you've looked at and thought anything about, Chad.
So I guess just to answer that last question there, is that regarding sort of a deposit return scheme kind of idea?
That's right.
Yeah, well, I think it's worked to quite good effect in other countries, like I mentioned earlier, in sort of Scandinavia. And I guess as Catherine touched on, there are sort of certain ramifications of the policy like that, and it needs to be done well. It needs to be an all-encompassing deposit return scheme, not just on certain items. And it needs to be available to everyone. You know, we can't just see it at sort of one supermarket chain in the country. We need to see it everywhere, and we need to see it protected in legislation, really. And it does need to be equitable. And I think there needs to be an honest conversation. This is where we go back to the climate justice idea. of, can people afford to pay more for items knowing that they get taken care of? That's a question. Maybe people can't. So we've got to think about how this is done. Does there need to be more government incentive there? And I think that's the big question. I mean, it can work. It certainly can. But is that answering the question? Is that, greenwashing to an extent as well? Something like that. And are the bigger questions that we need to be asking. And the first question about plastics and the confusion. This is something that we sort of found early on in the Plastic Free Ouseburn campaign. It was like, yeah, let's get everyone on board with vegware. We found a business that could help other businesses procure the items, and it seemed like it was going to be a really great solution. We had access to some small composting bins at Ouseburn Farm, and the person who was working there at the time as the horticulturalist said that the coffee cups were breaking down after 3 weeks or so because of the temperature of the bins. I mean, and that was really one small example of where it was working. I couldn't say that it would work in someone's back garden. I couldn't say that it would work, on scale. And this is where we need investment into our local councils massively, because if they're able to provide that infrastructure, because we've got am I right in thinking that we've still only got one facility, Catherine? Is it Sand Hills? Yeah, sorry.
But that's, we can only, again, legislation, all we can touch in Sand Hills, and it's the kind of thing that Jason will tell you about, is that Bible and EWC codes. We can only touch garden waste at Sand Hills, otherwise its permit is out. Literally, we cannot, if cups and stuff appeared in there, potentially we would lose our license.
Yeah, so we need that legislation bringing in so that either we can, you're actually allowed to include certain things that are proven and scientifically proven to break down in a matter of time. There's a big difference as well between compostable and biodegradable. And this is something that we've seen, and flushable, nothing's flushable. Nothing should be flushed down a drain. We've seen great campaigns from councils and from organisations to try and, Northumbrian Water have got there, is it like a don't flush it campaign, bin it, don't flush it. Be good if people just maybe didn't use some of those items in the first place unless they really had to. But this is where we've got to ask those questions. There's a lot of, I've got a relative who can't recycle hummus pots, which is, I mean, it sounds daft, but if you imagine the amount that are going into, the wrong bins all the time, and the time and resources that takes up, it's a nightmare. I'd love to see, some sort of national strategy like has been mentioned on this, and see local authorities linking up, working together across regions or across the entire country to work on stuff like that. Because I think it does make it really hard, and it also puts the onus on the individual, and really it should be a bigger question about the companies that are making this stuff as well. That was the long answer, sorry.
I think that's a really good point, Chad, as well, to end on, basically, in terms of we need to, yes, take responsibility as individuals, but encourage those bigger organisations and use the power that we have collectively to do that. So thank you all very much. I think it was a really interesting conversation. Thanks to our speakers tonight for the discussion and trying to simplify what is, I think, can be quite a difficult topic. I think I'd probably summarise the key messages I've got as definitely from Chad, if not from all three, we need to reduce our waste. We need to kind of simplify some of the messaging and make things clear. And there is a need for more funding and regulations to support the work that's going on. Lost my screen. Our next event in this series is Wednesday the 18th of November at 7:30, where we'll be discussing the energy sector, renewables and carbon intensive jobs. So some really important conversations, and we'll have Beth Farhat from Northern TUC. We'll have Matthew Pennycook, who is the Shadow Minister for Climate Change. We'll have Tracy Wainwright, who is our EDF Unison Coordinator. And we will have Professor Rebecca Willis from Lancaster University, who has been heavily involved in the UK Climate Assembly. So should be a really good conversation. So thank you everyone for joining, and I'll see you then. Bye.